Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to take a super hyper-focused, honestly kind of earnest look at a fascinatingly minimalist piece of source material. You know that feeling when you're jolted awake by the unyielding blare of a digital alarm? Or maybe you check your phone and see just a massive wall of back-to-back identical text messages from a frantic friend? That feeling of instant, overwhelming momentum? Yeah, that's exactly what we're dissecting today. We're looking at a 30-word transcript that absolutely pushes the boundaries of repetition. It comes from a compilation simply titled Turbo Speed, and let me tell you, it's basically a masterclass in how a tiny amount of data can create massive panic and urgency. If you love structured analysis of deeply unexpected things, you are definitely in the right place.
At first glance, this raw text from the minuscule compilation might just seem like chaotic, auto-generated bug noises or just a completely random string of syllables. You read it and understandably think, what on earth is happening here? I mean, it literally reads, hello, heat, heat. Heat, 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 heat. Okay, hey, heat, 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 heat. It's totally absurd, right? But what happens if we treat this exact sequence as a profound linguistic dataset? Let's decode it together and see what hidden mechanics are actually driving this so-called turbo speed.
So, the absolutely crucial question is, how do we break down such a uniquely concentrated, rapid-fire auditory and visual experience into a narrative we can actually understand? In our modern world, we're constantly bombarded with notifications and endless feeds, so our brains naturally just tune out heavy repetition. We treat it as mere white noise to save mental energy. But to truly appreciate the architecture of this source material, we've got to artificially slow down the turbo speed. We need to look at the math, the structure, and this surprisingly deliberate pacing hiding inside these 30 seemingly random words. Okay, let's dive right into the core data here. 24. That is the exact number of times the primary subject, the word heat, is relentlessly uttered in this incredibly short span. Just think about that ratio for a second. If you wrote a 30-word email to a coworker, and 24 of those words were exactly identical, it wouldn't just be repetitive, it would be a complete, unnerving saturation of your message. And that's exactly what's happening here. In a transcript of exactly 30 words, 24 are identical. This isn't just a repeating echo, it's an absolute hostile takeover of the text. And this brilliantly illustrates total vocabulary domination. Out of a mere 30 words, heat consumes the vast, overwhelming majority of the pie. It leaves just these tiny, fragile structural slivers for the remaining phrases. We get a single one hello, an okay, and a hey. Those 5 little outlier words are quite literally the only things keeping this from being a completely uniform, solid block of text. They're acting as the super sparse scaffolding holding the sheer volume of the word heat together. So let's break this down into acts. Act 1, the initial greeting. When we map this whole thing out chronologically, a surprisingly clear structure actually begins to emerge. It isn't just spontaneous noise, not at all. It's a perfectly paced 4-act progression hiding right in plain sight. We kick off with an opening greeting, we hit a vocal catalyst, we're given a sudden, brief intermission, and finally, we experience absolute capitalized escalation. We're discovering a highly calculated rhythm here that frankly initially just looked like total nonsense. It begins by lulling us into a completely false sense of security. The sequence opens so slowly and conversationally with hello, it acts as a surprisingly relaxed prologue. I mean, if you were just reading these first 2 words completely out of context, you'd assume you were about to read a transcript of a totally mundane phone call, right? It's the universal baseline for picking up the receiver. And that context is absolutely vital. You cannot have the jarring impact of turbo speed if you don't first establish a normal, everyday cruising speed. And that is exactly what hello achieves. But then, almost immediately, the tone just fractures. We get a single isolated This is the undeniable linguistic catalyst. It signals a rapid shift in pacing and launches us directly into the conflict. It's like the sharp intake of breath before the plunge, or the literal spark that ignites the engine. From this exact syllable onward, the casual phone call nature of the opening is entirely and aggressively abandoned.
And that spark throws us right into Act 2, the first heat wave.
This is where the defining, overwhelming characteristic of our source material finally hits. Let's look at the mechanics of this onslaught. Delivering a rapid-fire rhythm, the text actually launches a preliminary double strike first, heat, heat. Then it pauses for that brief we just talked about. And then it unloads 10 consecutive, lowercase instances of the word heat, 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 heat.
It's a beautifully calculated acceleration. It gives you a little taste of the repetition, steps back for a millisecond, and then completely floods the senses with a relentless 10-word barrage.
Which brings us to Act 3, the brief intermission.
Just as that auditory barrage threatens to completely overwhelm the senses, the text delivers a brilliant, structurally necessary reset. With the simple two-word phrase, "Okay, hey," we're granted a micro-focus moment of respite. Think of it like a deep breath for the viewer. It's an incredibly jarring contrast, honestly. 1 second, we're at warp speed, absolutely bombarded by repetitive syllables, and the very next, we're right back to casual, water-cooler conversation. Treating "Okay, hey" as a profound structural mechanism might seem a little silly, but without this reset, the turbo speed would just blur into meaningless, fatiguing white noise.
So, what happens after the intermission? Why this sudden conversational pause in the first place? And what exactly does it set the stage for? Well, we've seen the baseline, the catalyst, the first wave of speed, and the reset. The underlying architecture of the transcript absolutely demands that whatever comes after this brief intermission has got to be the ultimate payoff. Which brings us to Act 4, capitalized heat domination.
The source material now strips away all remaining pleasantries for pure, unfiltered intensity. There's a massive structural revelation here. The text actually transitions from a lowercase barrage in the first wave to a capitalized heat. In transcription, this capitalization is the literal leap into maximum turbo speed. It usually denotes a sharp increase in volume, emphasis, or abrupt force. The text literally feels louder and moves faster than the first wave. It's an escalation in every sense of the word, completely demanding your total attention.
But here's the truly brilliant part. When you actually step back and count the raw frequency, a perfectly balanced, symmetrical structure emerges out of nowhere, hidden right inside all that apparent chaos. Count them. There are exactly 12 repetitions of the word heat before the intermission and exactly 12 repetitions of the capitalized word heat after the intermission. Mind-blowing, right? The entire frantic burst is mathematically, flawlessly balanced around that single "okay, hey" reset. These final 12 words, capitalized and unrelenting, represent nothing but high-energy acceleration. They visually and auditorily hammer the point home. There are no more catalysts, no more clever resets. It is a straight, unwavering sprint to the finish line. It maintains maximum velocity right up until it just abruptly ends.
Which brings us to a really fascinating conclusion. If perfectly symmetrical repetition is the ultimate form of speed, what does silence sound like? As we wrap up this explainer, we have to ask ourselves, once this perfectly balanced storm of turbo speed repetition finally ends, does the ensuing silence carry a profound meaning of its own? The contrast between the relentless symmetrical 24 beats of heat and the sudden drop to absolute nothingness is striking. It leaves you energized, breathless, and intensely aware of the space left behind. I hope you never look at a seemingly random string of words, whether it's a frantic text message from a friend or a glitchy audio file, the same way ever again. Thanks so much for decoding this with me.